black thing go from left to right, and I thought, I'm going to die out here. No one's ever going to know.
I couldn't believe what my eyeballs were showing me. I'll never forget how evil the eyes were. It was horrible. I mean, I've never seen nothing that evil.
It ran towards me at a rate that I can't even explain, turned and stared at me. And this look of, I just want to kill you. I want to say it was human, but it wasn't.
He was yelling at me to grab a gun, grab a gun. I was like, for what? He said, just grab a gun. And there's footprints all the way to the door of my house. It had went inside my garage all the way to the door.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Zia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
You're listening to Sasquatch Chronicles. Check us out online at sasquatchchronicles.com. If you've had an encounter, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you tonight. Want to give a shout out to my boy Jackson. He's 11 years old. He's one of my biggest fans there on the East Coast. Sent me a very nice email. He said, Wes, would you play an additional show this weekend to get my mind off things? Jackson, my boy, your wish has been granted. Tonight is a great show. I got Sean and Kelly coming on. Both had encounters in Oregon. Sean's actually a truck driver. He got out of his truck near Baker City, if anyone from Oregon knows where that's at. He actually got out of his truck, stopped to pee, got back in his truck, and saw one of the creatures. And then I'll be talking to Kelly, and he had an encounter in Oregon too as well, near Corvallis, if anyone's familiar with Oregon. If you're not familiar with Oregon, you probably have no clue what I'm talking about. But he had an encounter in Corvallis back when he was 11 years old. He'll be sharing that with us tonight. If you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And I know some of the members are probably like, why are you back so soon, Wes? We just heard you. I had a show where a gentleman was from Pennsylvania. He saw a white Sasquatch in a river eating fish. Very fascinating stuff. If you get a chance, check it out. SasquatchChronicles.com. Jackson, buddy, this is for you. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Sean to the show. Sean, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. And I know you're a long-haul truck driver. Your encounter took place near Baker City, Oregon, which is pretty desolate. But if you would you kind of start from the beginning? Tell us what you're out doing and walk us into what happened.
All right. Well, I was a newer truck driver, and it was my first solo load. I picked up some potatoes outside of Pocatello, in Idaho, and had to get them out to Portland. So I had plenty of time on my load. You know, it was a really nice day. There's a couple of passes that you have to go through that are pretty tricky, you know, to get down into the flatlands in Oregon off the 84. So I decided to pull over. It was around 5:30, 6 o'clock. I pulled over at it was more like a brake check station, not really a rest area, just off to the right side of the road. And there was another truck there at one end, and I pulled towards the exit so I'd have an easy off. And there was a dumpster there and some recycle. And anyway, like I said, it was around September, late September, early October. So the days were still really warm, but it got cooler at night. And the truck I have, when the temperature drops below 70 degrees, it'll automatically cut off if you leave it idling. But I went to bed with it on. You know, I had my coffee, everything like that. I was excited to start the day tomorrow, my first drop. So I crashed out, at around 7. And the way our hours work, I had to wait for them to reset. So I could have taken off, I believe it was around 4 is what I planned on leaving, 4:30. But I set my alarm for 3, and I went to bed. And I'm a smoker, so I leave my windows cracked a little bit so it doesn't gas me out. So I go to sleep. It was a comfortable night. Everything was normal. And I get up around 3 o'clock, before 3, because I woke up before my alarm. And, I lit a cigarette, poured some coffee into my, opened my thermos, and I hopped out to take a leak. And the way I was parked, I didn't want, if any traffic was to drive by, they'd see me, you can't. So I walked around the front of my truck to the passenger side and did my business by the dumpster and hopped back in, and I grabbed my phone. Yeah, mind you, while everything happened, I had my phone in my hand. I could have taken photos, I could have filmed it, but that was the farthest thing from my mind. So I'm logging into Facebook, I check some shit out, and I catch movement by the dumpster. And this thing, it looked tawny at first, and it was down low, just rose up and came around the dumpster and just stood there staring at me. It was just there. And I just froze. We locked eyes, and he was just there. Everything, I've heard of these. I've always been a fan of Bigfoot. I've always believed in the legend, but that was the farthest thing I ever thought would ever happen to me in my life. I was just horrified, terrified.
Yeah, I can imagine. So was he right in front of the truck looking up at you?
Yes, within 5 feet from the front of my truck, just right on the other side of that dumpster, because I was parallel to the dumpster. The dumpster was off to the right of me. And my truck had quit running, and I had my parking lights and my running lights, so I could see this thing.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, for the audience, can you describe what you saw?
Ugly, huge. The way it stood up, it was standing kind of at an angle with his right side to me and his left off towards the tree line, and he just kind of swayed. Like I told you yesterday, it looked like he had something wrong with him, like his arm. His right hand was kind of cupped, curled in, and he just swayed his head, staring at me, and he looked pissed, like absolute disdain. I can't even describe it. I can't in the feeling I had. I mean, my whole body went ice cold, and I thought I was done peeing, but I proceeded to do so again in my pants.
Yeah, and that definitely happens when people run into them. When you saw it, did it look more human in the face, or did it look more like a gorilla or chimpanzee, or how would you describe the face?
The face was, I've listened to a couple of shows, and when you've heard people say it looked almost aboriginal, that's pretty damn accurate. In the face, the forehead was really short and was conical, was kind of coned up. Wasn't that big up top, but the face was huge. The jaw was huge. Had a flat nose, kind of like ours, but like it's been mashed in, and really broad, really flared out, broad nostrils. And I guess it's hard to describe something that like that. I don't have words. The distance from the nose to the upper lip was longer than from the lip to the chin, and it had a hairline. It was so close I could see pine needles and leaves and shit in its hair, and it just stood there staring at me, swaying, making weird faces at me. Like I told you that if a human was to make this face, it would look like they were going, it would like purse its lips out and growl the whole way and bare its teeth. Like I said, I can't describe it. Yeah. It's like something right out of a horror movie.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and I understand exactly what you mean when you say that, because I can relate, and it is. It's like I always tell people, when you see it, you almost don't believe it. It almost looks fake when you see it. I mean, it's so real, it almost looks fake. But I would imagine, and that's a pretty desolate area you're in Oregon. I mean, you're on your own out there. No one's coming to help you in that general area of where you're at.
There was absolutely nothing I could do. Nothing.
And so what happens next? He's looking at you. You're looking at him. And
it's snarling and growling at me. Well, next step, we're just locked eyes. Mind you, this whole thing probably took about 10 to 15 seconds. And to the left, there was another one come out. And I told you it looked like she had something in her. She had breasts. Looked like she had dead coyotes or something. It was more than one. Small animals in her ear.
Did she look at you? Did she stop and look at you, or did she just... So she comes out. Didn't even acknowledge me. Didn't so much as glance at me. So I'm wondering, like I said, like I told you yesterday, and that's the part that still terrifies me to this day, why I won't go to rest areas or stop at night in places like that. You know, how long was that thing standing there watching me? You know, when I went out there, they could have taken me and there wouldn't have been nothing I could do. It's fascinating, Sean. It reminds me of, I can't remember the guy's name. He was a delivery driver, not so much a truck driver. I think he was more of a delivery driver. And he had gotten out one time to pee. And when he's peeing, he looks up and basically it's standing right there. He's practically peeing on the thing. And I'm always surprised he was able to walk away with his life and he was terrified. I mean, the guy was bawling through the whole thing. And I don't blame him. If I was in his shoes and I was recounting that story, I'd probably be bawling through the whole thing too as well. But that is a little unnerving because you get out, you pee, it's right by the dumpster. You basically jump back in and this thing walks out. It's probably thinking, what in the world are you doing? And that's terrifying, you know, and to have him have that expression, you know, him showing his teeth and giving you the stink eye and kind of making those facial movements. Was it like when you and I were talking the other night, I was thinking like, you ever seen like an old man swear underneath his breath at someone? Was it kind of like that, or was it more of, you said it was growling. Was it vocalizing at you? Beyond growling, was it vocalizing at you?
No, it was just doing this really low rolling growl that I could feel in my spine. Yeah, like I said, it's like I told you yesterday, it was almost like a growl coming out of a kettle drum. I didn't even think anything alive could make a sound like that. The was huge.
Yeah, they are. And that's the part that always shocks a lot of people is how big they actually are when you run into them. How big do you think it was?
Yesterday after we spoke, just to make sure, I took my seat out. Because like I said, we locked eyes, and I have my seat all the way up. And where I dropped the tape to the ground was 8.5 feet. And that still leaves room for 4. Yeah.
So you're thinking it was about 8 feet up?
Oh, yeah.
It's practically looking right. I said looking up. It's practically just looking at you in the bed of that truck through the windshield, I would imagine. Yeah. It's just sitting there. Didn't have to really strain its neck or anything. Was there anything else?
Didn't have to do a thing.
Yeah. Well, was there anything else that you remember? Any other details you remember about the face or an expression it made? Was there anything else that really stood out to you when you were looking at either or creature?
The eye, his right eye. Like I told you, it looked kind of milky. The other one was really dark, but this one looked like almost like it had a cataract or something. Yeah. Thing looked rough.
Which makes it more terrifying. Kind of that blind look, blind look in its eye. You know, it's interesting.
Yeah,
there's one in the planet.
I'm goosebumps right now.
Yeah. No, I hear you, man. It reminds me of the Planet of the Apes. You know, there's that one ape that has that blind eye and has a big scar.
Yeah, exactly.
Which makes it more terrifying, really, when you're sitting there and it's looking at you. So they walk off, and was that pretty much the end of that? Did you just basically get in your truck and drive out of there?
Yeah, I took off. They he was in 2 steps. He was gone. 2 steps. And, I drove out of there, and I didn't stop till I was in Pendleton, till I got down, probably at the Flying J there in Meacham. I stopped and just threw my jeans away.
Yeah,
I didn't sleep for a day after that.
I can imagine.
I hear people talk about encounters where they hear hooping and or they see him and then go right back to sleep in their tent. You know, here I am in a truck, and I thought I was going to die. This thing could have probably just reached through, and the glass wouldn't even have made a pause. It would have took that cab apart.
Yeah,
It was terrifying.
Yeah, it is. It really is terrifying, you know, especially when you see the size of them. I wanted to ask you on the female, did she look like the male, or did she have a different appearance than the male beyond the breasts?
She looked way better, way better. This thing looked snarled up and grizzled. She almost had a Patty look to it, but they were both really, really muscular. How can I put this? It's like comparing, Patty made these things made Patty look like that one drunk sister-in-law that always wears sweatpants and yells at her kids. I'm just so slob.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I thought this, after my encounter, somebody had asked me that. And I said, the creature I saw, I mean, muscle-wise, Patty looks like a you know, the Catwoman, the out-of-shape, saggy breast Catwoman. Right. And what I saw did not, you know, wasn't even close to that. You know, we're talking night and day. It was way more muscular. So this female you saw, you're saying she was very much more muscular?
Yes. Yeah.
Because everyone's seen Patty. So. That's fascinating.
And, you know, the thing that still kind of bugs me, I had my phone in my hand. You know, but I was scared if I would have moved, blinked, that would have been it.
Yeah, I wouldn't feel too bad, man. I mean, I've even talked to researchers that have been out there for 20 years trying to chase them down. There was one I was talking to one time. He had a video camera in his hand, and one ran across the trail right in front of him, and he forgot he had a camera. So I mean, it even happens when you're out there actually looking for them. Most people don't break out the camera. When you're in your truck and you just got done peeing and you had a smoke, and now you're trying to wake up for the day, I'm sure the camera was the last thing on your mind. What do you think that they are? I'm curious, because you got such a good look up close and personal with them. If someone were to ask you, Sean, what do you think Sasquatch is? What would you say to them?
You know, I put a lot of thought into that. I think they're primeval. I think they're their own thing. I mean, you could say, do they look like a monkey? Yeah, but so much more. Do they look kind of like a person? Yeah, but so much more. They don't belong. They just look wrong. But I think they're their own thing. I think they've been here for a long time. And I don't know how they managed to hang on and be so secretive. And, you know, to not be in the mainstream. They're good at what they do. But, yeah, I think that they're their own species.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
I hear people say that they think they're aliens or whatever, or a government experiment. And, you know, I might buy that, but the reports have been going back since the 1500s, 1600s. You know what I mean?
Yeah, way before there was a U.S. government. Yeah, I agree.
So that's my take on that. All I know is I never want to see one again.
Yeah, I don't.
Maybe on TV.
I don't blame you. Well, and it has affected you. I know when you and I were talking the other night, you were saying that, you know, some rest stops you won't stop at unless it's well lit. There's a lot of people there. I wouldn't blame you one bit for not stopping at a rest stop. And I've heard encounters with truck drivers at rest stops where they run into a lot of weird things, you know, even beyond Sasquatch. So a lot of your truck drivers, they'll go to like a double Flying J or something like that to kind of rest.
Well, I even get sketchy around there. I don't like to talk about it with people. You know, I told my daughter, and I told my partner, the guy I'm running with right now, because he's like, what the hell is wrong with you? You know, I won't, because we run the I-5 corridor, and it takes me over to Shasta and some other places that are really desolate. Sometimes we're forced to stop. I won't get out. I'll piss in a bottle. You know, and he's like, what in the hell is wrong with you? So, you know, I had to try to explain this to him, and he believed me. He's like, yeah, you're obviously pretty upset. And starts in with the whole, we need to get a gun, blah, 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 blah. And I don't even know how to explain to the guy, that's a good way to get yourself killed. A good way to get yourself killed.
You mean shooting at one of these things?
Like I told you. Oh, Jesus. Even if I had a gun that night, I wouldn't even have tried.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it worked out the way it did, and they just kind of moved along, and that was the end of that. I wanted to ask you, Sasquatch aside, what's the strangest thing you've seen while truck driving? And it could be anything.
That's a good one. Los Angeles. Well, I kind of feel put on the spot there. I've seen some pretty weird things out here. Damn, I can't really put anything to mind.
No, that's okay.
Hard enough for me to do this interview.
No.
I don't talk very well
and
to
that,
people.
No, and you did fine, Sean. I didn't mean to, I apologize for putting you on the spot. I just thought, truck drivers, and I'm sure the moment we hang up, you're like, I should have said that. But, truck drivers.
The minute you hang up, I'll have 100 things.
Yeah, there you go. Because you guys always see weird things. I mean, Sasquatch aside, I've talked, some of the craziest stories I've ever heard were from truck drivers. You'd think it'd be from hunters, or you'd think it'd be from, no, truck drivers take the cake. But be safe, as always, be safe. And I really appreciate you sharing the encounter. I think it's beyond fascinating, especially since I know the general area of where you stopped. And there has been a lot of encounters in that area. And I'm so glad.
Really?
Yeah. And there's a couple I'll send to you when we get off here. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing it, Sean. I really appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me, man. I did my best.
You did great. As most of you know, MyBookie is now sponsoring Sasquatch Chronicles. And last week I'll tell you guys about that in a second, but last week I was asking anyone of the listeners out there, have you guys won any money with MyBookie? And I got an email from Kirk. He says, hey, Wes, use the code. Got a free $100 with the Chronicles code. Won $280 on a $60 bet with the Colts and the Bengals. This is fun. Hopefully the luck continues. Also, I know absolutely nothing about sports. I talked to the guy who's setting up my account, and he goes on talking about setting up an account. But good job, Kirk. I hope the luck continues too, brother. $280 on $60 bet. I should have put some money on that game. Join now. MyBookie will match your deposit dollar for dollar. I think that's what Kirk was talking about, that extra $100. Use promo code Chronicles to activate the offer. Visit MyBookie online today. That's MyBookie. And don't forget to use the promo code Chronicles when creating your account to claim the bonus. You play, you win, you get paid. And who do we got this weekend? New England's playing Jacksonville. Well, I didn't realize MyBookie was just going to give away money this weekend. Go with whatever the odds say on that. We all know New England's going to win that game. I was also going to bet against the Browns this weekend. And then that guy from the confessionals, I can't remember what his name is. He was telling me he's going to put his money on the Browns to win against the Saints. He's going to bet the odds. When he's not invited to the show, somehow he finds his way on the show.
I'm Tony Merkel from the Confessionals podcast, and I approve this message. Take anything serious that Tony has said during this commercial is completely prohibited. He's not a professional. He's just a truck driver of the podcast, so please keep your words to yourself.
Man, if the Browns win this weekend, I got to take this episode down. I'll never hear the end of it. Hope everyone enjoys this episode. If the Browns win, it's coming down. Thank you to MyBookie. Let's jump into it tonight. Next up, I want to welcome Kelly to the show. Kelly, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you being here.
Hi, Wes. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. And you were 11 when your encounter happened, weren't you?
I was, yeah, and I'm almost 49 now, so it's been a while, but
yeah.
It's, the memory's still pretty fresh.
Yeah, it never quite goes away, does it?
No.
And I know it happened down there in Oregon. I say down there because it's south of me, but near Corvallis is where your encounter took place. If you would you kind of just start from the beginning and walk us into what happened?
Sure. So, I think it was probably about 1981 or so. My mother passed away, and I was 10 when she died, and turned 11 soon after that. And I think dealing with grief and everything, my dad had me stay with some friends of the family, and they lived, I think, on a probably a little sub house on a farm, a little worker's house, something like that, because he worked on this farm, and I stayed with them for probably a week or two. So I was staying out there with them, and they do various things. They take me fishing or whatever, but I remember one night, probably just before dusk, Sharon took me out for a little ride on the farm, and it was a pretty large farm, grass seed, a little bit of mint that they grew, and the land was, of course, it had the grass fields and some other fields with different crops, but all around it was woods, and it was beyond the woods was the Willamette River. And we drove out a little ways on a dirt road and stopped, and I think we were just gonna take a little walk. So we stopped on the dirt road, and facing the direction the car was facing, off to our right, there was a field, and it was shaped about like a cul-de-sac, not an extremely large field, but then to our left, it was as if the field continued on the other side of the road. And then around the edges of the cul-de-sac, you might say, was woods. And then it came out a little bit behind us. The woods came right up to the road. So we got out and started walking a little bit. And all of a sudden, these deer, I think I recall it was a buck and two does, they jumped out of the woods right by us. So you almost could have reached out and touched them. And I remember thinking, that's strange. I mean, why would they run out of the woods toward us? And we just kind of watched them go and kept walking. And I'd say we kind of turned and started walking into that field that was like a cul-de-sac. And I'm not very good at distances, but maybe a couple hundred yards to the woods, not very far. And we had just taken 2 or 3 steps into that field, and I heard this sound. It was this deeply resonant roar, bellow sound, and it's like nothing I've ever heard. It was just such a deep sound, and it froze me in my tracks. And at about the same time, I looked and I saw this dark figure just crashing through the brush toward us, the brush, the tree branches. And the things I remember was it was very tall, probably about 8 feet tall. And I knew that because, I'm about 6'4" now, and I can reach up just over 8 feet. And I would say it was as tall as I could reach. Of course, back then I wasn't that tall, but I still left with the impression that it was about 8 feet tall. I remember this huge mouth that the sound was coming out of, and then these big, long, swinging arms as it ran, just pushing inside the brush and the vegetation. And I remember at the time, I think my young mind tried to categorize it, and I thought, this is some very angry person running through the woods toward us, maybe a homeless guy out there camping or something. And then my mind said, no, this isn't a person. It's too big. And when especially when you're that young, you just kind of go into this tunnel vision. It was almost instantaneous panic, like the fight or flight reaction kicked in. And after I stood frozen for what was probably seconds, I took off running toward the car, which by that time we had walked a short distance, and it didn't take me long to get back to the car. But Sharon was not really able to run, and she was a little bit older, and so I saw that she was back there. I didn't even have the courage to look back at whatever this thing was that was chasing us. I was just in this haze, and so I ran back to her and tried to help her, and I remember just running back and forth between her and the car, certain that we were going to die, and we took off. We didn't look back. We just took off, and then we went and saw to where her husband was and told him about it. And he called the Fish and Wildlife Department, and they said it was probably just a bear coming up from the river. And even at 11, I said, well, no, bears don't run on their hind legs. I mean, it wasn't just like something stood up and was staggering toward us. This thing was running, and like I said, it had those very, very long arms. So it could be, it was a very terrifying event for me at the time. And, in the whole situation with my mother dying, it was just, it was kind of overload, kind of too much. And I kind of wonder if there's not some repressed memories in there where maybe I would remember some details. And sometimes when I think about it or talk about it, I remember a little bit more. But time went on, and I wasn't sure what it was. I came back home, and we moved from Oregon to Minnesota. At the time, I ended up going back to Oregon years later, but just kind of filed it away, as kids will do.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's really fascinating. What did Sharon say? What did she think it was? Or did you and her ever? Did she kind of look at you when they said it was a bear? I mean, did she give you any input on what it was or what she thought it was?
Yeah. She said, too, that it wasn't a bear. I was young and there was a lot going on in my life at the time, so I can't remember exact conversations. But I know, at that time, as a lot of kind of church people like to do, they talked about demons and things like that. And she might have ascribed it to some sort of demonic activity or something, and for me, like, I'm a preacher's kid. I believe in a spirit world, but I didn't really think that it was that. And, that actually seemed more scary to me in a way. But we said that wasn't a bear, but I don't know that we ever came up with anything. But like I say, sometimes people of a certain bent, they see demons around every corner or whatever. So that might have been her default. Well, it was some sort of demonic activity, but for me, it was something very real. And I think later probably, we got on to Minnesota, and I was in a new school and new surroundings and everything. So I didn't really have a lot of space to think about it a lot, but I think at some point it probably did enter my mind that maybe this was a Sasquatch thing. But it was later when I was in college, and I was probably 18 or 19 years old. I was talking to a friend, and he said, I think you had a Sasquatch encounter. And it just kind of, it all made sense. It fell into place. And it was like I sort of had the brain space to re-examine it and look at it. And I still remember the sound very, very clearly. It's like nothing I've ever heard before. And it's kind of funny because I just recently I tried to replicate it myself, and I made a recording of it, probably a pretty poor attempt. But and I just happened to stumble across that Ohio Bigfoot.
Yeah, the Ohio
track.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course I'm a poor imitation, but they actually sounded very, very similar, and what I heard was very much like that, but it also had a certain roar or ferocity or growl to it. And I think, I look back and I think probably what happened was this thing was hunting the deer, and we got in the way or somehow spoiled the hunt. And I tend to think it was angry, and it was either running after the deer and saw us, or it mock charged us and warned us off. But the funny thing, which I mentioned to you before, Wes, was that I ended up going back to that farm one summer when I was in college, and going back there and working and driving combine and different farm equipment and bringing in the grass harvest. And at night I would stay out in one of those little outbuildings, little trailer or something. And, I've spent a lot of time in the woods. I was in the woods all the time as a kid, in the woods and the fields, and I was never scared. I'd walk around in the dark and everything. But for some reason, staying out there on that land, I just had this just anxious, scared feeling at night. And I was so mad at myself for being scared, but, and maybe, part of me was remembering that, but it just felt like I'm out in this trailer. It felt like something's watching me, or like there's a presence out here. And like I say, that might just be because somewhere in the recesses of my mind, I was remembering this event. But, I was a big strapping, 19 or 20-year-old, whatever I was at that time. And one night I got sick of it, and I ran out into the night, probably in my underwear or whatever, and just yelled, "All right, if something's out here, you're going to get me, come get me, because I'm tired of being afraid." And of course I heard nothing, crickets. But I faced my fear. Of course, the next night I had the same feeling again, so I don't know if it helped. But
yeah, it's strange, and it could be that's where you had the encounter. But one thing I've noticed, even with myself, and I guess I can only speak for myself, sometimes you do go into areas and you get this weird feeling like there's a presence, there's something there. And there's no noise has been made. There's no reason for you to feel that way. But I have walked into areas where I'm like, I don't like this at all. There's something's not right here and I don't like it. But it's really hard to explain that to someone. You know what I mean? And I'm sure it's easy to chalk it up and say, well, I was scared when I was an 11-year-old kid. But sometimes you got to listen to your gut, man. I don't know that is PTSD. It almost makes you wonder if a lot of times I tell people, if you feel like a presence is nearby, it probably is. If you feel like your life's in danger, you're probably right. And I think you have to go off of that gut. I was going to ask you why you thought it charged you. You kind of alluded to it, but it never came out in the open. It just made like a dog barking and no bite. It just made a huge display, which would be enough to get me out of there. And I'm a grown man, but so it just made it a big display, but it never actually stepped out in the open with you guys.
Not that I saw. Of course, I was too petrified to look back. But I really think probably it stopped, just before the edge of the woods. So, and it was clear, it was clear enough to see it very clearly. There was some brush and branches and things in the way, but it was a very tall, bipedal figure running toward us to the point where I thought, this is some really angry, deranged man coming at us. And then my brain just kind of said, no, this is not. It couldn't put it into a category, but I don't think it probably ran out into the field. And unfortunately, Sharon passed away. I don't know, 10 years ago or so. So I wish I could call her up and say, hey, do you remember seeing if that thing went out into the field? But I did talk to her a little bit about it. Oh gosh, at least 15 or more years ago, and she still just kind of didn't know what it was. And I brought up the possibility that could have been Sasquatch, and she thought that could have fit. So,
yeah, it's fascinating. Oh, I'm sorry to hear she passed away. It's one of those accounts because do you think it was basically just making a bunch of noise to scare you guys away? Do you think it was trying to kill you, or do you think it was just I'm going to make a bunch of noise over here and scare you two away?
Well, by the sound that came out of its mouth, it was like pure rage and intimidation. So I don't think it was, just curious or something like that. I got the sense that it was really pissed off that we were there. And, I just kind of put two and two together, and with the deer running away, thought it probably was pursuing the deer or sneaking up on them or something. And here come these people talking and ruin the whole thing. So I kind of imagined if I was on the other side of the woods, this thing is stalking up on them and getting closer, and suddenly we drive up and start talking, and the deer get aware and then realize this thing's stalking them, run away, and then it's just furious at us. But like I've heard, I just started listening to your podcast, but I've already heard quite a few people say, if that thing wanted to kill us, it could have. I mean, this thing was big enough to where I didn't even feel safe in the car. I felt like, we've got to put some distance here because it was, I don't know what it was at the time, a little gremlin or something.
Yeah.
But I felt like this thing was big enough to where we wouldn't have been even safe in the car.
Yeah, and that's terrifying. The other thing, too, is, and I always tell people, too, because they do have short tempers, and I think most people realize that they have short tempers at this point, and you can be harmed. And just because you're a woman or child doesn't mean you're going to be not on the receiving end of one of these things. And I just think it's fascinating. As I listened to the encounter, I think you're probably right. It was probably full of rage and piss and vinegar, and it was ready to hurt someone. But I think it was more or less, it's kind of like when a dog barks at you and barks and growls and barks and growls and barks and growls, but they never bite anyone. It's kind of like more of a display, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It seems like it was more of a display. How did that affect you throughout your life? I mean, I know you're a successful businessman now. You've moved on with your life and everything, but does that still affect you to some point in your life? I would imagine you still think about it from time to time.
I do. I actually went on to get a Master of Science degree and a bachelor's degree. And, it's funny, Wes, because, I went through the whole science program. And so I learned the scientific method and things, and I consider myself pretty rational. I like to study and I like to prove things. So I tend to be somewhat skeptical of alien stories and things like that. But at the same time, I'm not purely academic. I think pure materialism has its limits, because there are, I think, very obviously other things out there that aren't just described by the motion of molecules. I mean, even as you go into the underpinnings of reality itself, we get down to energy and information and all those types of things. So I think to some extent, even getting my degree and pursuing my profession, it always gave me the sense that, okay, science can categorize things and we can classify things, but there are always possibilities of other things out there that haven't been documented. And honestly, I think the scientific method supports the idea of curiosity, and that we don't know everything. And usually for me, when somebody's trying to be scientific or sound scientific, you can tell they really don't have the background, because they talk of certainty and they talk of proof. A theory is something that's very well established by a lot of tests and trials and information and things. But any real scientist would tell you, we don't talk about proof, because things are subject to revision as we find more information. So I think, for me, I might have been skeptical of this if I hadn't seen it myself. And I'm kind of in a place now of where, like, I don't really care if somebody believes me or not, because I know what I saw and experienced, and it was very, very clear. And in fact, I had the experience before I really even knew what I was seeing, or what I was experiencing. So I think in that sense, professionally speaking, it impacted me greatly. On a more personal level, I have 5 kids now. My oldest is 17, and I've told him the story, and he's very, very fascinated with Bigfoot. He said, "Dad, let's go out on an expedition sometime and try to find one." And my reaction was, and it's like, "Dad, wouldn't you like to see one again?" And I said, "No. I'm 6'4", 225 pounds, very strong. Literally, almost nothing scares me. If I saw a mountain lion out in the woods, an aggressive mountain lion, I would be concerned, and I would be, like, okay, how do I get out of this?" But there's something about this creature that I hate to say it, but I even admitted to my own son, that is the one thing in the world that scares me. It's some sort of primal fear, and it's hard to describe. It's more than like there's just a big ape out in the woods. It has this presence, and my son's tried to pick my brain about that. What do you mean, Dad? And it's evil presence. I said, I don't know. It's just something where it just at a very primal level, it creates this intense fear inside of you. And it's different than the fear of like, oh, I'm out camping and there's a bear and it could rip me to shreds. It's very, very hard to describe, but it's deeper than that. It's not just a fear of being harmed, and I can't fully explain that. And so I'm not afraid to go out in the woods. In fact, I took my family out camping recently in New Mexico, and we had a horrible night. We had what I think was a mountain lion stalking around the camp, and I got up and shot into the air, and I think scared that off. And then all of a sudden, of all things, we're in a Forest Service campground. These drunk people show up and are threatening us and things, and it was a horrible night.
Oh, jeez.
But that kind of thing doesn't hold a candle to what I experienced. I'll still go out in the woods, and if there's animals, I'll deal with that. You're always concerned about people, but this is just another level.
Yeah, you're right, Kelly, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but you're right. There is something. I know what you mean. I mean, if I came across a cougar, listen, the cougar's probably going to kill me, but guess what? I'm going to strangle it and poke its eyes out the whole time it's trying to eat me. I mean, I will hurt it. It may win in the end, but I'm going to hurt it. But when you come across these creatures, you're right. There's this weird primal. It's I've said it in the past where it's almost like it's like in your DNA. It's almost like we've met before. We've come across each other before, and it didn't work out well for me in the past. Somewhere in the past, we've met, and it's just weird. And I know exactly what you mean. I'm a big guy too as well, and I'm not so sure a black bear or a cougar would strike the fear in me like Sasquatch does. And Sasquatch can just stand there and look at you and strike fear into you. It doesn't even really have to roar or scream or do anything. So there is this weird primal fear with it. It's interesting to hear you talk about science. You said a bunch of things in there. The doc would have loved you, Dr. Bennernagel, because he spoke a lot like how you did. He talked about curiosity, and so he always cracked me up. Again, I won't go too much on this. I just love the man. God rest his soul. He sometimes he would talk to me like I was a scientist, like I'd spent years in college, and I'd be like, English, doc, I'm just a dumb hick from Washington, English. But he used to say the same thing. He'd say he doesn't understand these scientists because it always starts with curiosity, and you can always come up with a theory, and sometimes you got to be careful on the proof you come forward with, because some guy down the road can come up with something that totally destroys your theory, and now your book is no longer good. So there's this weird politics in science, that is frustrating at times. I know it frustrated the doc. It doesn't really frustrate me that much. I figure they'll jump on the train when the time comes, and I'll move on to aliens or something else. So
I think in science, everything's, well, at least at the higher levels, things are peer reviewed, and there is the university system, and people don't want to be the odd man out, which it makes me wonder how Dr. Meldrum has survived all these years. He's got his niche, but again, I know what I saw, and I know it defies categorization. But as you were talking, I was thinking like a mountain lion or a bear or even a human being. I kind of know what I'm dealing with. And it's not that it wouldn't be an encounter that would make your adrenaline go up, and you'd feel like, I need to defend myself. And usually, in fight or flight, I run toward danger. It's just I've had my family threatened by people before, and I run toward it. But maybe it is the weirdness factor. Maybe it is the fact that this thing is somewhat like us but different enough, and you don't know what you're dealing with. So it's this. It makes it even weirder that it's somewhat like us, but different.
Yeah, because it's so unknown. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how it's going to react. You don't know how to play the game. With the bear, you know how to play the game. With the cougar, you know how to play the game. Your chances of them attacking are pretty slim to none. And a lot of times, if you do the right thing, they'll leave. But when it comes to these things, I've heard many encounters where they just snap and they just go nuts. And what are you going to do? How are you going to stop something that's, just like what you saw, 8 feet tall, probably several hundred pounds, had no qualms about tearing through the brush like it was King Kong? You're not going to stop it. If it decides to snap on you, there's nothing you can do. You can shoot it, hope for the best if you have a gun. Other than that, I don't know that they'll come out and every one of them will attack you, but I get what you're saying. It's the unknown. You don't really know what to expect. You don't know the type of reaction you're going to get. And you kind of do with a cougar. You kind of know what to expect.
Yep. And it's been interesting when I've heard, this is something new to me too, the infrasound hypothesis, you might say. The sound is something that I really remember, and it's, if infrasound is a thing, it could be that it really put something in my gut, that embedded some fear there, because to this day, I don't want to be out in the woods thinking about Bigfoot. If I can think about bears and lions and tigers and bears, oh my, if people come into my camp, I'm going to confront them, but that's just, there's something about that I can't just exercise the mental control over. Like you can learn over the years to master fear and even function if you're afraid. But when my son says, would you like to see one of these again? It's the one situation where there's something I can't overcome where, I'd like to see one, but if I was a long ways away. Yeah. So
like 500 yards and you're on a hill with binoculars. I get it. And in a tank. I get it completely. What do you think that they are, Kelly? I mean, you're an educated man. You saw what you saw. If someone were to ask you, I realize it's all theories and we're guessing at this point. It's all opinions. What do What do
can
you
I
think?
can you hazard me a digression here for a minute?
Sure, of course. Of course.
You talked about sensing that or something feeling off, and I hesitate about this a little bit as a scientist, although I think it has a rational explanation. But when I was a kid and I was out in nature a lot, I could really sense when animals were there, when they were looking at me, and it could have been just small cues that, when you're younger, you have a better sense of smell and hearing and all that. But I remember one time I was in a city and I was sitting on some grass in a park, and I just had this feeling, and I turned around and a coyote was stalking up on me. Just things like that. I could feel that they were there before I even saw them. And, animals do this. We know that animals can do this because they'd have to do it to survive. And I'd say as I grew older, that ability has diminished. But I think as a kid, I was very in tune and very aware. So, there could be something to that idea that when I was back out there on that farm, maybe I was sensing something, or maybe it was just, like you say, a little PTSD. Thanks for allowing me the digression.
Yeah, of course.
But what do I think it is? That's a tough one. I mean, it's funny because I'm what you might call a theistic evolutionist. I believe in a creator, but I believe that at least some of the mechanisms of evolution are how he did it, or the sort of the mechanisms of creation. And I see obviously hominids and man-like creatures. I think it's possible that there is something that maybe at some time was competing with Homo sapiens, but had to go into hiding to survive, because although we're a lot smaller, we're intelligent and have the ability to get together and marshal forces and make weapons and all those types of things. So I don't really know. I mean, I think it's beyond just an ape, because I think, like the mountain gorillas, for example, they didn't find those for a long time. And I don't know that it was because they were particularly stealthy, and it's not like the mountain gorillas were coming into places with human habitation. We had to go up and find them. I think it could be some sort of hominid, some sort of human-like creature that has become very, very good at hiding itself. And it's interesting because I have some friends who've had different types of wilderness training, and they've told me stories of some of the Native Americans who were extremely good at evading detection, and like the U.S. cavalry would come out to find them, and they would just seemingly disappear. But they just had an ability to blend into the landscape. He told me, he lives in New Mexico, he told me that Geronimo and his band could have evaded the U.S. military for indefinitely, but they had women and children that they couldn't hide so well. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that could be something out there that has its skills so fine-tuned that it makes us look like children in the woods when we're out there, and that it can hide itself. And you think, well, why haven't we found a body? They seem to function in societies, and they may bury their dead. I don't know, but I do find it. There are so many eyewitness accounts, and even if you discounted a lot of them as either hoaxes or misidentification, there's just so many, and I can tell you with a certainty that I know what I saw. So that's kind of what I think it is. It's something that survived.
Yeah, it is an interesting take, and I don't blame him for hiding. If Bigfoot had a podcast, she'd probably say, where you see one human, be careful, because there's probably more around. You know what I mean? And that's kind of, you're right. We're a pack animal. One coyote's no big deal. You can kill one coyote. You got 20 of them coming at you, it might be a different story. So we're a pack animal. So I don't blame them for hiding. I think you are probably onto something, that they do hide, because otherwise, what's the thing we always do? We kill them. When we find something new, we kill it. And I'm on the side of the fence to one should be shot and drug in. I don't think it'll ever see the light of day, but I think if there was no other obstacles, one should be shot and brought in, but I don't think you're going to get it that far. But it is fascinating to think that, and I think that's why they do, because humans are dangerous. I mean, what happens when a human disappears? All of a sudden, 50 humans show up looking for that one. Yeah. And so there is a lot of danger with them interacting with us. So I don't blame them one bit for trying to stay in hiding. I think their emotions are their downfall, though. I think their curiosity is their downfall. Because if he would have never came up from that creek and just waited for you guys to get back in the car and go, you would have never seen him. Or he could have turned around and went back the opposite direction. You would have never even known he was down there. So I think their emotions and curiosity is going to be their downfall. But it's a fascinating account. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing it, Kelly.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me, and I hope anybody who's listening to this who thinks this is all a joke or a hoax or something, as I probably would have if I hadn't had this experience, I hope you'll have an open mind, because this thing really does exist. And I'm on the fence with you there too. I kind of want proof to be found in a way, but in another way, I don't want to see groups of people going out and hunting it, and suddenly we lose what could be a species that's out there surviving on its wits. So, yeah, I'm torn on it. Even though the thing terrifies me, I still kind of like the fact that there's something out there that is living its life and avoiding human beings as much as it can. So,
yeah, I hear you. Well, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Wes. Good talking to you.
Yeah, it was great talking to you too as well. Jackson, my brother, out there on the East Coast, I hope you're happy. I hope it took your mind off the storm for almost an hour. If you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. That's it. Be safe. Take care of each other. And I will see you guys next time. Have a good night, everyone.
Sometimes